have the outline, but I will add a couple other points as we go along. The definition, as we look at the definitions that were added, we added birds simply because we wanted to make sure that all animals were encompassed, and making assumptions is dangerous, so we tried to remove assumptions and make sure that people understand that this is about all animals. We've added the term shelter for a number of reasons. We wanted to work towards a time when we might have a certification process for shelters, and that is not required in this legislation, but we've added the definition so that people can at least work towards defining themselves as an animal shelter. We've added the word neglect, or the definition neglect, because a lot of the complaints that are in the communities really fall under this category. So we wanted to more accurately describe that majority of complaints where they were. We've also added, and this is where we spent a lot of time, on production animals, and that was really important for a number of reasons. One is that it helps us define the role between the Department of Agriculture and local authorities, and who it is who's responsible for the investigation of production animals as opposed to companion animals. By doing so, we eliminate much of the workload for the Department of Agriculture, and that's important. The next piece of legislation will tie some of that into why it's important to reduce the workload here. About 80 to 90% of the complaints that are received in the animal care cruelty complaints, about 80 to 90% of those have to do with horses, and ISDA is then called on to help in that investigation. And those horses are generally companion horses, not production animals. So as we have arrived at this definition of production animals, that allows the local authorities to address the issues of cruelty as it relates to companion animals, and does not encumber the ISDA in that way, and nor does it slow the process down. So the local authorities can act quicker to resolve some of the issues around companion animals. We've also added a torture definition, and this was a definition that is about as close to a national definition. In each of these definitions, we sought out all the references that we could find across the country, having to where other states had tried to define them. And our work here is a compilation of those definitions. And it was important, it is important to have this definition because it makes a distinction for those behaviors against animals that are simply more egregious than cruel or neglect. So we wanted to have that on the books. We've elevated in this legislation the torture conviction, if someone was convicted of torture, or abandonment for that matter. We've elevated those to a new third category of misdemeanor penalties, so that those who are convicted of torture or abandonment don't get to start at the bottom of the punishment scale. They get moved right to the head of the class pretty quickly. We require ISDA to establish a list of the designated shelters, and that's going to be important for a number of reasons, so that when animals are in trouble, people in communities know which shelters are appropriate, are on the list. It also will allow a central place where the shelters that have space or room for abandoned animals, even horses, rescue organizations can find themselves on that list, so that others who have animals that may be in trouble and don't know what to do with them, that maybe run out of money and can't feed them any longer, so there'd be a source of information for those people as well, so that they can find out what resources are available. And again, we're not asking for certification, simply a list of those private shelters or public shelters that are available. We have repealed a number of pieces of legislation, and you have that list there. We repealed cockfighting because in the new statute, in this bill, it all falls under animal fighting rather than cock or dog fighting. We've removed the impounding without food or water because it was a section of code that was not used any longer. It was difficult to prove and no longer used, and members of the task force had recommended that we take that out, so we did that. Likewise, for high altitude decompression chambers, they're no longer used. There are none in Idaho, so we removed that to clean up the statute a little bit. And beating and harassing animals, because we have incorporated some of those definitions into torture and the cruelty definitions, then we no longer needed that particular statute to stand alone. And as I said, we changed the dog fighting to animal fighting, which did bring cockfighting into the felony provision of dog fighting that already existed in the statute. So it is true that we have expanded the felony provision in this bill insofar as cockfighting is now a felony, when intuitively one would think that any animal fighting, that same penalty should apply. So that's what we tried to do. Well, that's what we have done. Then, once again, we've emphasized the abandonment provision. And that was important because the abandonment of horses was an issue that has really taken the front page over the last couple of years, when the economy has had such a downturn, and folks were either unable or unwilling to find shelters or other organizations that were able to take those horses. A lot of people believed that if they just hauled them out to the desert, to the public lands, and turned them loose, that was perfectly appropriate. And for most domestic animals, they're not able to survive once that happens. So we did want to raise an awareness of abandonment, and it also starts out at that third step, misdemeanor penalty. Abandonment is a difficult one to prosecute. You have to prove it, so you almost have to catch them in the act of doing that. So it will continue to be a problem, but we are trying to put a little bit more, a few more teeth in the law, so that when we do find people, when they are able to be successfully prosecuted for abandonment, that there will be a significant penalty involved with that.